He thought he was done with the world, until he found two little girls chained to a tree. What happened next didn't just change their lives, it might change yours too. If you believe in second chances, hit that like button and subscribe. This is a story you won't forget. Jack didn't hear the first few sobs. The wind had been too loud, slipping through the seams of his old cabin like it had a purpose, whistling over the warped windows and around the rusty chimney. But the second time, the sound cut through. It wasn't the wind. It was human, small, fractured, a child. He was on the back porch, splitting logs, the axe head striking wood with practiced precision. It was what he did when the memories came. Too close, let the body work, keep the mind quiet. But this sound, it was not from memory. It was here. Now. He straightened, heart suddenly unsettled. Jack hadn't gone into the woods behind his cabin in 3 years. Not since Sarah died. Not since the accident that took her and their unborn son. There was a trail that used to lead to their favorite picnic spot. A hollow in the pines where light always seemed to fall like forgiveness. He'd sealed it off in his mind, told himself it didn't exist anymore. But the cry came again. High, broken, fearful. His hand went to the scar beneath his collarbone, a nervous habit. It burned faintly as if remembering fire. Jack grabbed his flashlight, threw on his coat, and stepped into the cold. The forest was breathing. That's how it felt. The trees swayed gently, their branches sighing above like old giants. The ground was soft with pine needles and wet earth. His boots left clean impressions in the damp soil. He followed the sound. Not loud, but constant now. The kind of crying a child does when they've given up on being heard. And then just past a crooked cedar he saw them. 2 little girls, tied to a tree. His breath caught. They were no older than 7 or 8, identical, same auburn hair plastered to pale faces, same wide brown eyes staring at him like he might vanish if they blinked. Their wrists were bound with a rough cord that dug into skin. One girl was shivering so hard her teeth clicked. Jack's flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. "Mister," one of them whispered, "our mom said someone kind would find us." He didn't speak. His body moved on instinct, kneeling down, hands fumbling in his coat pocket for the pocket knife he hadn't used in months. The blade clicked open. He cut the rope. One girl slumped forward into his arms. The other stood, legs weak, and leaned on her sister. He didn't ask questions, didn't process what he was doing. Jack scooped them both up, one in each arm, and turned back toward the trail. His lungs burned. Not from exertion, from something deeper. Fear. Not of danger, but of feeling again. Back at the cabin, Jack lit the stove and got the fire roaring. The room slowly filled with heat and the faint smell of cedar smoke. He found 2 old wool blankets in the chest by the door, wrapped the girls in them. They clung to each other on the couch like frightened animals. He brought them warm milk. They drank it without speaking. The taller one finally murmured, "My name's Lily, this is Rose, we're twins." Jack nodded. "I'm Jack." Rose's lip quivered. "Are we in trouble?" He crouched beside the couch. "No," he said softly. "You're safe here." Their eyes held his. No adult suspicion, just raw, aching trust. It gutted him. "Where's your mom?" he asked. Lily hesitated. "She told us to hide, then she ran to stop him." "Who?" Neither of them answered. They didn't have to. Later that night, after he'd tucked them into a makeshift bed by the fire, Jack sat at the kitchen table staring at his hands. They were scarred. Not just from years of carpentry, but from the fire. The one that took Sarah and the house he built for her. Burned it to the ground. Just like the life he'd built. Gone in a night of sirens and smoke. He flexed his fingers. The pain wasn't in the flesh. It hadn't been for a long time. It was in the silence that followed. And now, these girls. 2, lives left in the woods like trash. How long had they waited there? How scared had they been? How could someone— A knock shattered the silence. Not loud, but urgent. He stood, walked to the door, heart hammering. When he opened it, she was there, young, soaked, shivering, her face pale with exhaustion. But her eyes were fierce. "My name's Grace," she said, almost choking on the words. "Those girls, they're mine." Jack stepped aside, said nothing. She dropped her coat and fell to her knees on the rug, pulling the twins into her arms like they were oxygen. The girls didn't cry. They just held her, like they knew time was short. He made tea. The silence between them stretched but didn't feel heavy. "I didn't abandon them," she said, eyes fixed on the fire. "He would have killed me if I'd stayed. I had to draw him off. I thought someone might find them." Jack nodded. He understood desperation. The choices that don't feel like choices. Grace looked at him then. Really looked. "Thank you," she said. He didn't answer, just watched the flame dance in the fireplace. In his chest, something shifted. A crack in the stone. Not warmth. Not yet. But maybe the memory of it. The next morning brought fog. Thick and low, it swallowed the pine trees whole and turned the yard into a pale dream. Jack stood by the sink, coffee cooling in his hand, staring through the window like the fog might part and make sense of what had happened the night before. He wasn't sure how long he'd been standing there. Behind him, the kettle hissed softly on the stove. He hadn't spoken a word since dawn. The girls were still asleep in front of the fire, curled up under a quilt he hadn't used in years. Grace had taken the cot in the corner, her breathing soft even. She hadn't asked to stay. He hadn't offered. But here they were. 4 people in a place built for one. His cabin had never felt this full, or this quiet. He set the mug down and turned away from the window. The floor creaked beneath his step. He walked past the fireplace, glanced down. Lily was staring at him, big, unblinking eyes peeking from under the quilt. "You don't talk much," she whispered. Jack crouched next to her. "Don't have much to say." "That's okay," she said, and reached out, placing her small hand on his just for a second. It was the first time someone had touched him in over 3 years, and it felt like something broke inside, something small and hidden and rusted, shut. Later, Grace sat at the kitchen table, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. She looked like she hadn't slept much. Jack poured her a second cup of tea, slid it across the table. "You got a plan?" he asked quietly. Grace's fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the cup. "No." "You running from him?" She nodded. "We've been hiding for months. Shelters, motels, churches. But he always finds us." "You call the police?" Her laugh was dry, hollow. "You ever tried explaining to a cop that you're scared of a man who hasn't laid a finger on you in public? He's smart, knows when to smile, when to let go just before it bruises." Jack said nothing. The silence in the room folded around them like another blanket. She stared into her cup. "I wasn't trying to dump them. I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe someone kind would come. Maybe." She looked up at him. "You did." Jack stood. The knot in his chest was tightening again. "They can stay tonight," he said, voice rough. "But this isn't a place to disappear. It's just a cabin. I'm not—" He paused. "I'm not the rescue type." Grace nodded. Her eyes didn't waver. "I'm not asking for rescue, just a place to breathe." That night, Grace swept the floor. Lily and Rose colored quietly at the table. Jack repaired the loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. No one said it out loud, but it felt like something domestic, something dangerous in its comfort. He found himself watching them. Grace in the kitchen light, sleeves rolled up, humming under her breath. Her movements careful, like someone who's always listening for footsteps. The girls laughing about crayons and silly shapes. Rose crawling into his lap without asking. Lily handing him her drawing. A crooked tree and 4 stick figures beneath. He blinked down at the paper. One of the stick figures had a beard. "That's you," she said, proud. "Next to Mama, And us. He cleared his throat, folded the drawing, put it in his pocket. Thanks. His voice cracked on the word. That night, as the fire dimmed and the house quieted, Jack stepped onto the porch. The fog had lifted, revealing a sky full of stars, so sharp they looked like someone had cut holes in the dark. He leaned on the rail, listening to the hush of the trees. The ache in his chest hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown louder. There were moments, fleeting, dangerous moments, when he felt like he wanted them to stay. That scared him more than anything. He'd built his life around silence. Around not needing. Around not being needed. Because once he had needed. And everything he needed had burned. He didn't hear Grace until she was standing beside him, arms crossed against the cold. Thank you, she said. He shook his head. Don't. Why? Because it doesn't change anything. She looked at him sideways. You think kindness is a commitment. It can be. Not always, she said. Sometimes it's just a light, a moment, a hand out of the dark. They stood in silence. The stars pulsed quietly above them. Why did you come out here, she asked. Jack hesitated. Then, to forget. And now? He didn't answer, but his hand slowly settled against the porch railing, right next to hers. Not touching. Just close. Close enough to know that if the wind shifted, their fingers might meet. Jack had lived alone long enough to forget the sound of dishes clinking in the sink, the creak of footsteps overhead, the soft hum of a child talking to herself in the next room. But by the end of the third day, those sounds became the rhythm of the cabin. He didn't like how quickly they fit. The girls started leaving drawings on the table every morning. Always trees, always four figures. One even had a dog they didn't own. He kept them in a drawer, said nothing. Grace cooked with the quiet skill of someone who'd once cared a lot about Sunday dinners and birthday breakfasts. She moved around the kitchen like she was remembering who she used to be. Muscle memory chasing a life that had gone missing. Jack told himself it was temporary, but he found himself repairing things that hadn't mattered in years. The hinge on the back door, the wobbly chair. Even sanded the windowsill where Rose liked to sit and draw. He didn't call it nesting, just maintenance. There were no promises, no plans, just a rhythm and silence. It was the silence that unsettled him the most, because it wasn't empty anymore. It was shared. One morning, Grace found him at the workbench in the shed, chiseling wood with a focus that kept the world at bay. She didn't say anything, just watched. He could feel her presence like warmth behind his shoulder. What are you making? She asked. Jack didn't look up. Table leg. The old one cracked. She leaned in. You're making a new table? Repairing it. For us. He paused, just enough to mean something, then kept working. It's just a table. Grace smiled. Sure. They didn't ask each other questions. That was one of the rules. Unspoken but firm. No questions about Sarah, about the ashes Jack kept in the tin box beneath the floorboard. No questions about the scar on his wrist or why he didn't sleep before midnight. No questions about what he lost or how he blamed himself. No questions about where Grace had lived before or how many times she'd tried to leave him. No questions about the bruises she never spoke of or the way she flinched when the wind slammed a door. Silence was safer than truth. But the girls, they didn't follow the rules. Rose had no filter. She asked Jack things like, do you like soup? Or, did you have a dog when you were little? Then immediately told him her own answers. Lily was quieter, but observant. She watched Jack with wide eyes and said things that landed deeper than they should have. You look sad when you drink coffee, she told him one morning. He blinked. What? Mom used to drink coffee like that, when she missed Daddy, before. He didn't ask what before meant. One night the power went out. Just a blink, storm winds kicking up from the hills. The girls gasped. Grace reached for the flashlight like she'd done it 1,000 times. Jack lit candles. The cabin softened instantly. No harsh overhead light, just golden pools flickering against the wood-paneled walls. Grace curled up with the girls on the couch, whispering, "Stories in the dark." Jack sat across the room in his old chair, not listening to the story, just the sound of her voice, warm, steady, safe. It scared the hell out of him. Later that night, when the girls were asleep and the wind had calmed, Grace joined him in the kitchen. She poured them each a small glass of bourbon from the bottle he kept for no particular reason. They drank in silence, leaning against the counter like two people pretending they weren't holding on to something invisible between them. "You fix things," she said quietly. Jack shrugged. "Some things. You don't talk much. Some things don't need saying." She looked at him long. "You ever want it again? A family?" The question hung there. Heavy. He didn't answer, not with words. He just looked past her into the shadows to the spot by the fireplace where the girls had left another drawing, this time with hearts around each stick figure. Grace didn't press. She just sipped her drink and whispered like, it wasn't meant for him to hear. I didn't think I'd be allowed to want that again either. In the morning, he found a list on the table, handwritten, Grace's cursive. It wasn't a letter, just a list: groceries, chores, things that needed fixing. And at the bottom, "Thank you for letting us stay. I know it's not forever, but it's saving us even if we don't say it." Jack folded the list, put it in the same drawer as the drawings. And that night, after the girls were asleep, he sanded the table smooth, replaced the cracked leg, tightened the bolts, then sat alone in the kitchen and ran his hands along the grain of the wood, steady and slow, like he was memorizing, like he was trying to remember how it felt to make something strong enough to hold 4 plates again. Jack was up before dawn. The cabin was still and blue with early morning light, the kind of light that made everything feel fragile. He stepped outside with a cup of coffee and stood on the porch as the mist peeled back from the trees. Inside, the sounds of the sleeping house wrapped around him, Grace's faint breathing from the cot, the rustle of blankets, a child's sleepy sigh. It had been a week, 7 days of quiet rhythms and half-finished sentences, of repairs and unspoken boundaries. He hadn't asked how long they planned to stay. She hadn't told him, but every day she rose early and scrubbed dishes that didn't need scrubbing. Every night she folded their laundry like it meant something more than survival. It did, and Jack didn't know what to do with that. That afternoon, Jack found Rose sitting beneath the old pine tree behind the cabin, humming to herself while arranging pine cones in a circle. Lily was farther off, drawing in the dirt with a stick. Grace hung damp laundry on a line stretched between 2 trees. It felt almost ordinary. "She likes circles," Grace said, nodding toward Rose. "Says they're safe. No corners for monsters to hide in." Jack watched the girl for a long moment. "You talk to them about what happened." "Some. Enough." She squinted at the light filtering through the branches. "They don't need all the details, just to know they're not broken." He nodded. Then she said it, soft and slow. He never hit them. That's what made it harder to leave. People look for bruises, not silence. Jack felt something stir, deep in his chest, familiar and ugly. Silence can be worse. Grace looked at him. "You know that firsthand?" He didn't respond, just took a slow breath and leaned against the porch rail. After a while, she sat beside him. The conversation came like a slow leak, not a confessional, not an unraveling, just pieces. Grace told him about the first time, how her ex had smiled through it, how it took her years to realize she was disappearing day by day, how she stopped calling friends, stopped cooking, stopped singing to her, girls at bedtime. He never left a mark, she said, just took things, little things, until I couldn't find myself in the mirror. Jack didn't offer advice. He didn't ask why she stayed. He knew that question came from people who'd never been in a room with someone who made love feel like a hostage situation. He just listened. And after a long silence, he spoke. "I built this place for my wife." Grace turned to him quietly, Surprised. We bought the land when we found out she was pregnant. I worked nights to pay for the lumber. Every wall here, every floorboard, I laid it for them. He looked out into the trees. Then the accident. Black ice. She was 7 months in. I got the call in the middle of sanding the kitchen table. Grace didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Jack ran a hand over the railing. After the funeral, I tried to rebuild the house. Thought I could hammer my way out of grief. He exhaled through his nose. Almost a laugh. Turns out grief doesn't care how good you are with your hands. Grace's fingers brushed against his. Light. Unassuming. But there. You stayed. I didn't know where else to go. Neither did I. That night he heard music. Soft. Barely audible. He came out of the bedroom and found Grace in the kitchen with a dusty radio she must have found in the closet. It buzzed with static between a country song and some old jazz. She smiled when she saw him. The girls are asleep. Thought I'd keep it low. He nodded, leaned against the doorframe and watched her move. Barefoot, relaxed, her shoulders swaying slightly as she stirred a pot of soup on the stove. It was such a small, beautiful thing. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, and remembered a time when his home had music in it. Later, after the dishes were clean and the fire burned low, Jack stood in the doorway of the girls' room. They were asleep, tangled in blankets and each other. Their breaths were steady. Their chests rose and fell in rhythm like twin metronomes of safety. He felt something heavy in his chest. Not grief, not fear. Something like return. He turned and found Grace behind him. I can take them and go, she said gently. If it's too much. Jack looked at her. Really looked. At the faint scar along her temple. The softness beneath her eyes. The steadiness that hadn't broken, even after all she'd endured. It's not too much, he said. His voice was quieter than he expected. It's just more than I thought I'd ever feel again. Grace's expression softened. She reached for his hand. Not to hold it, just to be close. He let her. And for the first time in years, Jack didn't flinch. The table had been broken for years. Jack had left it that way after Sarah died. A cracked leg, a crooked frame, and one burn mark from a birthday candle that had toppled the year before she got pregnant. He couldn't bring himself to fix it. It felt like betrayal, like if he made it whole again, he was letting go. But now, 4 plates sat on it, wobbly, uneven, but full. Grace served bowls of vegetable stew. Lily passed a basket of biscuits she and Rose had helped knead, their flour-covered handprints still faintly visible on the front of Grace's apron. Jack watched them all, wordless. It wasn't a holiday. It wasn't a celebration. It was just a Tuesday. And yet, it was the first time he'd heard laughter in this house in 3 years. He'd spent the morning sanding down the table legs and tightening the frame. Grace had offered to help, but he'd gently waved her off. It was something he needed to do alone. Fixing it wasn't easy. It creaked, resisted. But when it finally stood steady, level and still, Jack felt something shift inside him. Something like breath returning after being held too long. When he told the girls the table was fixed, Rose had squealed, clapping her flour-covered hands. "We can eat like a real family," she'd said. That word, family, landed in his chest like a stone and stayed there, humming. After dinner, they sat around the table long after the plates had been cleared. Grace sipped tea, her eyes soft in the candlelight. Lily leaned against her shoulder. Rose sat in Jack's lap, humming a tune only she seemed to know. The fire crackled in the hearth. Moths flitted near the porch light. It felt suspended, like a breath held between thunder and rain, like nothing could ruin it. And Jack hated how much he wanted to believe that, because happiness, he'd learned, was expensive. And he didn't think he could afford another loss. That night, he found himself in the shed, standing in front of a stack of old pine boards. He hadn't built anything in years, but his hands moved on instinct. measuring, cutting, sanding. The scent of fresh wood filled the small space. Outside, the night pressed close, but in here, there was purpose. Peace. He wasn't sure what he was making yet, only that something inside him needed to build again. The next morning, he walked into the kitchen to find Grace sitting at the table, holding one of Lily's drawings. She slid it across to him without a word. This time the picture showed a cabin, a pine tree, 4 stick figures, and a dog again. Always the dog. But what made him pause was something else. A 5th figure, drawn just outside the house, not quite in, not quite gone. He looked up. Grace's eyes met his. "I didn't ask her to draw it," she said. "But she said it's where you stand most of the time, just close enough to leave if you need to." Jack looked at the small crayon figure. Alone. And he saw himself. That evening, Jack took the girls out behind the cabin, where the woods opened into a small clearing. He brought a shovel and 2 young saplings. "We're planting trees," Lily asked, delighted. He nodded. "That pine out front is dying, too much rot. But the roots still hold." "Like it's still trying?" Rose asked. "Exactly." They dug together, messy and laughing. When the trees were in, Jack patted the dirt firm and sat back on his heels. "This one," he said, nodding toward the smaller of the 2, "is yours. You 2 take care of it, all right?" The girls beamed. Grace stood at the porch, arms crossed, smiling at them like she was watching something she'd never thought she'd see again. Something not just safe, but growing. That night, over leftover stew and fresh cornbread, Jack finally asked, "You ever think about what's next?" Grace didn't answer right away. She finished her tea, her thumb tracing the rim of the mug. "I used to think next meant escape," she said. "A new job, a new state, a name he couldn't find. Now, I think it might just mean breathing easier. Here," she looked at him, "for now." The fire popped behind them. He didn't ask her to stay. She didn't ask to stay. But the way their eyes met, the way her hand brushed the back of his on the table, it felt like something decided them both. Later, when the girls were asleep, Grace found him outside on the porch again, sanding the edge of a wide slab of pine. "What are you making now?" she asked. Jack didn't look up. "A table. Didn't we just fix one?" He nodded. "That one was from before. This one's new." She stepped closer. "For who?" He paused, then said, not quite looking at her, "For 4. Her hand found his in the dark. "Maybe 5 someday," she whispered. The first sign came with the wind. Not a gust, but a sharp, sudden shift in the air, a stillness too exact, like the woods were holding their breath. Jack felt it before he saw anything, the way his skin prickled along his arms, the way the birds went silent. Even the girls seemed more subdued that morning, drawing quietly in the corner, their usual chatter replaced by hushed tones. Grace moved through the cabin like she was listening, for something beneath the surface of everything. Jack caught her checking the locks twice before noon. He didn't ask. He didn't need to, because by dusk the second sign came, tire tracks, fresh ones, along the gravel road that wound past the old well. Deep, clean, too new to be from anyone local. Jack knelt and ran his fingers over the marks. Someone had been close. Someone heavy. A truck. Not from town. Not from here. Back at the cabin, he watched Grace stir soup in the kitchen. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the ladle. She hadn't seen the tracks, but it was like she already knew. "He's here," she said quietly. Jack didn't pretend not to understand. How would he find you? He always does. He clenched his jaw, eyes narrowing toward the woods beyond. "The window. You told me you changed your name. You left no trail." "I did everything right," she said. "He still finds me." She set the ladle down carefully, her voice flat. "It's not about finding. It's about owning." Jack stared at her. "You don't belong to him." Her eyes flicked up to his. "You think that matters to men like him?" That night, Jack slept on the couch, boots on, coat draped across the back. The shotgun he never used leaned against the wall. He didn't tell Grace to lock the girls in the back bedroom. She did it anyway. He didn't ask how she knew what to, though some knowledge comes from survival. The next morning was too quiet. No birds, no wind. And then, just before noon, the third sign came. A figure at the edge of the clearing. Jack saw it first through the kitchen window. A tall man, standing at the tree line, not moving, just watching, too far to make out the face, close enough to be a threat. Jack stepped out onto the porch, eyes locked on the shape in the trees. "You need to go back inside," he said to Grace without turning. "Is it him?" she whispered. He nodded. "Get the girls. Don't open the door unless it's me." The man didn't come closer. He just stood there as if claiming the space with his presence. Jack didn't shout, didn't threaten. He just stood his ground. One hand near the shovel leaned against the porch. After a while, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees. But Jack knew it wasn't over. Later that afternoon, he drove into town. He spoke to Sheriff Carter, an old friend of sorts, a man who had once stood beside him at Sarah's funeral. "I've got a man watching my property," Jack said. "You know who it is? Not personally. But the woman and kid staying with me? It's her ex." Carter frowned. "The one she ran from?" Jack nodded. The sheriff scratched at his jaw. "Legally, if he's on public land and not doing anything, he'll do something," Jack cut in. Carter looked at him, not the way a lawman looks at a complainant, but the way an old friend looks at someone who's already been through too much. "I'll send someone to keep eyes out," Carter said. "And Jack?" Jack turned. "Don't let him make you a ghost again." Back at the cabin, the girls were quiet. Grace was pacing near the window. When she saw Jack, something in her shoulders finally eased. "Did you see him?" she asked. He nodded. "He's testing. Watching. Waiting. That's what he does." Jack moved closer. "He won't get past me." She looked at him then. Not with fear, not with hope, but with something deeper. "You don't have to fight my ghosts. They're on my porch now," he said. "That makes them mine too." She swallowed hard. "If anything happens, nothing's going to happen. Jack, Grace." His voice was low, firm. "I won't let him near them, or you." Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she stepped forward, pressed her forehead gently to his chest. He didn't move, just stood there, arms by his sides, letting her lean. "You don't owe us this," she said into his shirt. "I know. Then why are you doing it?" He hesitated, then quietly, "Because I'm tired of losing the people I don't protect." That night, Jack didn't sleep. He sat by the window with the fire burning low, one eye on the dark outside, one ear tuned to every creak and sigh of the cabin. A storm was coming. He could feel it in his bones. Not the kind with wind and rain. The kind with gravel under boots and old ghosts at the door. The storm broke just after midnight, not thunder or lightning, but the other kind. The kind that walks on two legs, that waits until the lights are out, until fear is thickest in the air. That doesn't knock. Jack was awake, sitting in the old armchair by the front window, a dim lantern burning beside him. His fingers were tight around the handle of the shotgun resting across his lap. The girls were asleep in the back room. Grace sat on the floor beside them, a hand on each daughter's back like an anchor, holding them to the earth. And outside, he heard the crunch of boots on gravel. It wasn't rushed, it was deliberate. A message. "I'm not afraid of your silence." Jack stood slowly. The porch creaked as he stepped onto it. The cold air slapped his face awake. In the distance, clouds moved like smoke across the moon. His breath came out in slow, controlled clouds. And there, he was standing 10 yards away at the edge of the clearing like a man surveying land he believed was his. He was tall, broad, not sloppy like Jack had imagined. Clean coat, clean boots, like he dressed for this. You, Jack? The man called, voice casual. Like they were neighbors, Jack didn't answer. You've got something that doesn't belong to you. Still, Jack said nothing. The man stepped forward slow. I don't want trouble. I just want my girls. Behind Jack, the front door creaked open. He didn't have to look to know Grace was there, standing behind him in the shadows. The man spotted her. There she is. A grin pulled across his face, slow and venomous. You always did have a flair for drama, Gracie. Jack raised the shotgun slightly. You've got 5 seconds to turn around. Or what? The man chuckled, hands out to his sides. You gonna shoot me in front of the kids? Jack's finger didn't move from the trigger. 1. The man's eyes narrowed. His stance shifted. He took another step. You think this ends here? He hissed. You're playing house with someone else's wife. 2. You think she won't run from you too? You think you're better than me? 3. You're not a father. You're a placeholder. 4. He took another step. And that's when Jack moved. He didn't fire. Instead, he stepped down off the porch, fast and sure, slamming the butt of the shotgun into the man's chest with a force that knocked the air out of him. The man stumbled back, shocked. Jack tossed the shotgun to the side. It was empty anyway. Then he swung. Years of rage. Years of guilt. All of it came loose in his fists. The man tried to fight back, but Jack fought like a man who had nothing to prove, only everything to protect. They crashed onto the gravel, fists, elbows, dirt, breath, blood. Somewhere in the distance, the girl screamed. Grace called his name, but Jack didn't stop until the man stilled, moaning, spitting blood into the grass, whimpering like the coward he'd always been behind closed doors. Jack stood over him, chest heaving. You don't come near them again, he said, voice low, ragged. If you do, I don't call the cops. I don't call anyone. You'll disappear in these woods, and no one will ever ask. The man rolled onto his side, groaning. I'll press charges go good. Jack grabbed his coat collar, yanked him up to eye level. Try it. I'd rather tell the truth than live in fear. He shoved the man back, hard. Now walk. The man stumbled away, limping into the trees back the way he came. Jack didn't turn until he was gone. The cabin door was open. Grace stood there, framed in lantern light, eyes wide with something between horror and awe. The girls were behind her, clinging to her legs, shaking. Jack stopped short. His knuckles were split. Blood on his face, shirt torn. He looked like the monster they'd escaped from. I'm sorry, he said, breath shallow. You weren't supposed to see that. Grace stepped forward slowly. I've seen worse, she whispered. He looked down, ashamed. I swore I'd never raise a hand again. You didn't, she said. You stood between. That's different. She reached up, cupped his cheek with a trembling hand. You didn't break tonight, Jack, you held. They spent the rest of the night by the fire, huddled close. Jack's hands were bandaged. Grace brewed tea. The girls clung to him, not with fear, but with safety. They knew now. Whatever the world threw at them, this man would not run. And when Lily finally spoke, voice soft against his shoulder, Jack's throat closed. Can we stay? He looked down at her, then at Grace. She didn't ask again. She didn't need to. He nodded. You're already here. The sky was pink with the kind of stillness that comes after war. The man hadn't come back. Not the next day. Not the next week. Sheriff Carter confirmed he'd left town. Bruised, quiet, humiliated. Grace didn't ask where he went. She didn't care. Jack suspected she'd stopped giving him space in her head the moment she saw him, on the ground, broken and shrinking. Life returned slowly. They planted fall vegetables in the garden box behind the shed. Rose gave names to each tomato plant. Lily started learning how to sand wood, watching Jack with quiet reverence. Grace laughed more. Still soft, still guarded, but real. And Jack Jack was learning how to live inside the warmth again. The table in the kitchen had 4 chairs now. A 5th was in the works, still unfinished. Jack hadn't asked why he was building it. He just was. Hope has a way of sneaking in like that. Not all at once, just a little more room in the house each day. And then the fire came. It started sometime after midnight. Jack woke to smoke. Thick, bitter. The kind that doesn't linger. It consumes. Flames danced in the hallway, licking the wooden walls. Heat hit him in the chest like a wave. He barely had time to register it before instinct took over. He ran. The girls were coughing in their room, huddled under blankets. Jack scooped Rose up with one arm, took Lily's hand with the other, and barreled through the smoke. Grace met. Him in the hallway, eyes wild. The back door, go. They burst into the cold night air, feet bare on frost-covered earth. Jack turned back once, just once, and saw the windows burst outward, glass shattering with a scream. The cabin was alive with flame. The neighbors came running. Sheriff Carter arrived with the volunteer fire crew, all too late to save much. By dawn, the place was a skeleton. Blackened beams, collapsed roof, soot where the walls used to be. Jack stood in the clearing, holding a wet towel to his burned hand. Grace was sitting on the tailgate of Carter's truck, the girls wrapped in blankets beside her. She looked at the ruins with an expression Jack couldn't name. Grief, maybe, but not surprise. Like something inevitable had finally caught up to them. Carter stepped up beside Jack, eyes on the smoldering wreckage. You think it was him? Jack didn't answer right away. He's not a man who forgives being beat. Carter nodded grimly. You want me to find him? I want to rebuild. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. After this? Jack looked at what used to be his home, charred and smoking. But in his mind, he saw something else. Rose naming tomato plants. Lily's stick figures taped to the fridge. Grace humming in the kitchen. It wasn't the house I needed, Jack said softly. It was who filled it. They stayed with Mrs. Halverson for a few days, a widow down the road who baked pies for no reason and cried when she saw the girls in her hallway. Word spread fast in the town. By the end of the week, the front yard was full of trucks and folding tables. Someone brought lumber. Someone else brought tools. A man Jack hadn't spoken to in years handed him a box of nails with a gruff nod. It wasn't a miracle, just community. The kind of quiet goodness people forget still exists. Grace stood beside Jack that first morning, eyes wide as she watched the swarm of neighbors measuring, hammering, laying foundation. Why are they here? She whispered. Because they remember, Jack said. Not what I lost, but what I built before. She blinked, and for the first time, tears fell. He didn't wipe them away. He just put his arm around her and let her lean. By the second week, the new frame was going up. It wasn't the same layout. Grace had suggested a sunroom. The girls wanted a window seat. Jack didn't protest. It felt right to let this house become something new. Not a replica, but a resurrection. He spent evenings carving again, not chairs, this time. Something smaller. A nameplate for the door. Hollow Bend. The name Sarah once gave their land. The name Jack never put up, until now. One night, as they sat around a borrowed fire pit behind Mrs. Halverson's barn, Grace handed Jack a drawing. It was from Lily. The cabin again, the tree beside it, 5 stick figures holding hands. This time they weren't just standing near each other. They were connected, lines drawn between their hands like bridges. Jack stared at the paper for a long time. She drew the 5th one inside this time, he said. Grace smiled. Because that's where you are. That night, Jack sat beside the sleeping girls, running his hand through Rose's hair, gently pushing a stray curl from Lily's cheek. And he whispered to the dark room, not for them, not even for Grace. Just for himself. You're home. The first nail went in just after sunrise. Jack's hammer struck wood with a steady rhythm, sharp and clean. Around him the chorus grew, saws humming, boots crunching gravel, voices calling measurements over morning. Wind. The air smelled of fresh-cut pine and wood smoke and something else. Hope. Raw and newly sanded. The town hadn't just shown up. It had remembered him. Not the version of Jack that vanished into his grief years ago, but the man who once helped rebuild the town hall roof in a thunderstorm, who repaired old Ms. Dyer's porch for free, who used to smile. Now they were building with him, not for him. And it mattered. Grace walked the edge of the new frame, sleeves rolled up, hair tied in a knot. She wasn't helping out of obligation. She was building like someone who believed this place might hold her if she gave it everything she had. Rose followed behind her, trailing pink chalk hearts on the new foundation. Lily handed out lemonade in paper cups to tired, laughing strangers. By noon, Jack found himself standing beside Sheriff Carter, watching the roof trusses rise. Didn't expect this many to come, Jack murmured. Carter smiled under his mustache. That's the thing about small towns. We've got long memories and short grudges. Jack chuckled quietly, then fell silent again. You're different, Carter said after a while. I don't feel different. No, you look like a man who decided to stay. Jack didn't answer. He just looked at the frame taking shape in front of him and nodded. The rebuild took time. And during that time, something else happened. They became a family, not in declarations or signatures, but in small, repeated choices. Jack let the girls pick the color of the front door. Green. The color of the moss in the woods where they'd first laughed without fear. Grace started humming again, more often now, not just when she thought. No one was listening. Jack kept building. A bench here. A new coat rack. Little things. Things that mattered only if you planned to stay. One evening, after a long day of work, Grace brought him a glass of sweet tea and sat beside him on the half-finished porch. You know, she said, I used to think the only thing I was good at was surviving. He looked over. Her face was soft in the golden light, tired but peaceful. Turns out, she said, I'm good at staying too. He didn't say anything right away, just leaned his shoulder slightly against hers. Enough to feel real. Enough to mean something. The night the windows went in, Grace brought out a small wooden box. She opened it in the new kitchen, light bouncing off the glass panes behind her. Inside were photographs, old ones, creased, faded. Pictures of her and the girls before. Jack held them carefully, as if touching them too hard might send the memories running. I used to think if I saved these, it meant I still belonged to that life, she said. But, I think, I was just waiting to be strong enough to look again. She looked up at him. And now I am. Jack nodded, then slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a smaller photo, his only one. Sarah, barefoot on this same land, holding a coffee mug, sunlight caught in her hair like a halo. He set it beside Grace's, not to compare, not to forget, just to let them rest side by side. The house took form faster than Jack expected. By the second month, they had a roof, walls, and working plumbing. The girls had bedrooms with windows that faced the trees. Grace chose curtains with little wildflowers, stitched into the hem. Jack carved their names into the baseboards, something no one would see but them. The fifth chair at the kitchen table was finished, and this time, Jack sat in it. The night before the final touches, the town gathered in, the yard with pies and guitars and folding chairs. Someone lit a bonfire, someone brought cider. It wasn't a party. It was a welcome home. Mrs. Halverson wrapped the girls in knit blankets. The high school woodshop teacher admired Jack's porch rails. Even the old grump from the hardware store handed Grace a flower pot with a grunt that could have meant anything. Jack stood off to the side, watching the glow of the fire dance in Grace's eyes. She caught him staring and walked over. You okay? He nodded. Better than okay. Tomorrow it'll all be done. Yeah. And then, Jack took a long breath. Then we start living in it. Grace tilted her head. And are you ready for that? He looked down at her. Really looked. I wasn't ready to lose everything, but I am ready to hold something again. Her eyes glistened, but she smiled. Then maybe we're both ready. Later, after the crowd had gone and the yard was quiet, Jack stood under the stars with a hammer in one hand and a wooden plaque in the other. He nailed it to the post by the front steps, hollow bend, and just beneath it, carved by his own hand, home is who stays. The morning was soft with light. The mist that had settled in the trees overnight lifted slowly, like a curtain rising on something sacred. The rebuilt cabin stood still in the clearing, pale wood catching the sun like a breath drawn deep after silence. Inside, the house stirred awake, not with alarms or voices, but the sounds of ordinary life. The squeak of footsteps on clean floors, the low hum of a kettle, the thud of small feet chasing a dog named Pinecone, who wasn't really theirs but had started sleeping on their porch and refused to leave. Grace stood in the new kitchen, hair loose down her back, folding dish towels that smelled of cedar and sun. The girls sat at the table, bent over a puzzle that had somehow lost only 3 pieces in the fire, and Jack, for the first time in a long time, was exactly where he needed to be. He watched them from the doorway, mug in hand, leaning against the frame he'd built with the same hands that once only knew how to destroy. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Rose looked up and grinned. "We're going out to the trees after breakfast." Grace nodded without looking up from her folding. "They've decided it's time." "Time for what?" Lily answered without hesitation. "To plant the second tree." It had been Lily's idea. She said it one night in her sleep, muttering something about the promise tree. The next morning she remembered only fragments, but Grace understood, and so did Jack. They had planted one tree the week after the fire, thin, trembling, next to the blackened stump of the old pine that once marked where Jack's life broke open. But this second tree, it wasn't about what had burned. It was about what they chose to grow in its place. They walked out together after breakfast, tools in hand, laughter rising like birds from their shoulders. Jack carried the sapling, a tall, slender fir with deep green needles and a root ball wrapped in burlap. The girls argued over who would dig. Grace held the watering can filled to the brim. The clearing was quieter than usual. No wind, no bird song. Just the pulse of 4 people standing still around a patch of earth waiting to become something new. Jack handed the girls the shovel, and they dug, clumsily, joyfully. "Not too shallow," he said gently. "It needs to go deep if it wants to last." Grace knelt beside them, helping press the soil down around the roots. Jack poured the water slowly, watching it soak in. The moment settled like a hush. Then Grace stood and turned to him, brushing dirt from her hands. "So," she said softly, "what are we planting, really?" Jack looked at the tree, then at her, then at the girls, muddy and grinning, arms wrapped around each other like roots around a trunk. "A choice," he said. "One we make again tomorrow, and the next day." Grace reached for his hand. Their fingers met without hesitation this time. Worn palms, warm grip. "We don't promise forever," she said. Jack smiled, voice steady. "No, but we promise today." And that's how forever starts. That evening they sat on the new porch watching the light fade over Hollow Bend. The tree stood tall in the yard, thin shadow stretching across the grass. The girls had tied a piece of ribbon to one branch, blue and fluttering in the wind. Marker, a beginning. Jack sat with his arm across the back of Grace's chair, her head resting against his shoulder. The girls were curled up in a pile of blankets, asleep before the stars even blinked awake. The house behind them was lit from within. Golden, quiet, alive. "You ever think you'd have this again?" Grace asked, almost a whisper. Jack shook, his head. "No, I didn't think I deserved it." She turned her face to him. "But here we are." He looked at the tree, at the sky, at her. Here we are. Much later, long after the house had gone still and night covered the woods like a prayer, Jack stood in the yard beneath the second tree. The wind stirred gently through its branches, and the ribbon whispered its soft song. He placed a hand against the trunk. It didn't matter how fast it grew, only that it had been planted. With intention. With love. With the knowledge that the ground could break you, yes, but it could hold you too if you let it, and Jack was letting it. The second tree would stand, just like he would, not because he was unbreakable, but because now he wasn't standing alone. Sometimes, family isn't where we begin. It's what we choose to build, day by day. If this story touched your heart, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the last word.